In the vast sweep of the American plains and forests, survival was never guaranteed. The native tribes lived in harmony with the land, but harmony did not mean safety. Enemies lurked at the borders, predators prowled beyond the firelight, and the youngest, those who carried the tribe's future, were always the most vulnerable. Yet time and again they survived, shielded by traditions, strategies, and an unbreakable will to protect. But how exactly did the Native Americans defend their young against the countless threats of their world? Let's find out. The rising sun often cast light upon a world both beautiful and treacherous. Villages were nestled against rivers, plains, or forests, and though they thrived with laughter and song, the people knew shadows always lingered nearby. Rival tribes sometimes crept across borders to raid. Predators, wolves, mountain lions, even bears followed the scent of livestock and the weakness of unguarded children. The threat of abduction or attack was so real that vigilance was woven into the daily rhythm of life. Children were not raised in seclusion. They were raised under the collective gaze of the entire village. Every adult became a watchful guardian, every elder a teacher in survival, and every warrior a shield standing between danger and innocence. The village itself was a fortress of tradition. Fire pits burned bright not just for warmth but to keep predators at bay. Camps were positioned where the land itself gave an advantage, high ridges to see invaders coming, thick forests to conceal trails, and rivers to form natural barriers. Even the arrangement of lodges and tipis was intentional. The youngest were placed closer to the heart, and the warriors at the edges, forming a living wall of defense. But even these precautions could not guarantee safety. Stories whispered through the generations tell of nights when screams split the air, when raiders came in silence or predators snatched a child before the fire. These tales were not just memories of fear. They were warnings carved deep into tribal wisdom. From these shadows, the native people shaped their fiercest defense unity born of necessity. Among the tribes, the warriors were revered. But the first line of guardians was not always the men who bore spears. Women, mothers especially, stood as fierce defenders of their children. To outsiders, their strength was often underestimated, but to the tribe, it was unquestioned. A mother did not simply nurture, she prepared her child for the dangers of the world. At the first signs of trouble, women acted with speed and cunning. They could gather children into hiding places dug into the earth, hollowed beneath roots, or woven into brush. Some tribes taught their young to go silent at the sharp cry of a bird call, an alarm signal used to scatter them into safety. Older siblings too bore responsibility. A 10-year-old boy might already know how to string a bow, not for hunting alone, but to defend a younger sister if need be. A girl of the same age could keep infants quiet by rocking them with whispered songs, trained to silence even in the face of panic. This culture of defense was not fear, it was preparation. Children grew up knowing they were protected, but also knowing they had a role in their own safety. Every lesson, every chore, and every story around the fire carried the weight of survival. In this way, defense was not simply the duty of warriors, it was the shared heartbeat of the entire village. The most powerful weapons in defending the young were not always bows or spears, they were silence, awareness, and instinct. Tribes passed down lessons in survival from the earliest years, etching them into the minds of their children long before danger struck. A child learned to walk softly, to move without breaking twigs, and to breathe in rhythm with the wind. These were not games, but training in stealth, for one day of silence could mean the difference between life and death. When raiders approached, a village could vanish into the forest without leaving a trace. Children who had learned obedience to these silent drills often survived what outsiders thought impossible. Elders told stories not just to entertain, but to embed warnings. The tale of a careless child who wandered too far and was taken by spirits was more than myth. It was a coded lesson about predators and enemy scouts. The Thunderbird stories were reminders of storms, and the coyote tales of trickery, all shaping minds toward vigilance. By the time they could run, children already knew how to hide, how to remain still, and how to listen for danger in the rustle of leaves or the cry of a crow. Defense was not a single act of bravery, it was a way of life, carried in silence, carved into memory, and shared across generations. As the firelight flickered low and the children drifted into dreams, the tribe did not sleep as one. Watchers of the night, chosen warriors and scouts, kept their vigil. Their eyes traced the tree lines, and their ears caught even the faintest crack of a twig. To protect the young, these sentinels embraced sleeplessness and silence, becoming shadows themselves. Every tribe had its own system. Some rotated watch duty through the night, while others trusted their most seasoned scouts to stay awake until dawn. A single owl call in the darkness could signal an intruder, and in response, the camp would spring to life in seconds. Children were often the first priority swept away to hidden shelters dug days or weeks before, places no enemy would think to search. It was not just human threats that haunted the darkness. Wolves sometimes prowled close, their howls circling the village. Cougars waited in silence, their golden eyes fixed on the fire's glow. For this reason, the Watchers carried not only weapons but also firebrands, for flame was as much a shield as the bow. The children slept, believing in the safety of their elders, never knowing how many dangers were held at bay. But for the Watchers, the night was a battlefield of silence, each moment of vigilance, a barrier between innocence and chaos. It was this relentless commitment that allowed tribes to thrive in a world where safety was never promised. Defense of the young was not a duty that waited for adulthood. It was a fire lit in every child from the earliest years. Warriors were not made in ceremonies alone. They were shaped by necessity. From the age a boy first held a bow, he understood its purpose was not only for hunting but also for protecting those who could not protect themselves. Training was harsh, deliberate, and tied to the rhythms of survival. Boys practiced striking targets while sprinting, their movements designed to mimic the chaos of battle. They learned to fall without injury and to roll and rise with speed, for in combat, hesitation meant death. Girls, too, trained, many becoming skilled in setting traps, wielding knives, or delivering warnings faster than any runner. Defense was not bound by gender, but by responsibility. When danger came, the entire youth of the tribe often acted as the second shield. Scouts barely into their teenage years would carry news of enemy movement across miles of forest. Young hunters could intercept predators before they reached the village. Even the smallest child had a role, knowing when to be silent, when to flee, and when to trust the arms that carried them. This cycle of necessity meant that by the time a child reached adulthood, defense was instinct. Warriors were not created overnight. They were carved by years of responsibility, sacrifice, and the unyielding belief that to protect the young was to protect the tribe's very soul. Not every defense was drawn from weapon or vigilance. Some lay hidden in the sacred relationship between the people and the land itself. Many tribes knew the terrain like the back of their hand, and within it, they kept secret places designed for the protection of children. Sacred groves, caves tucked deep into cliffs, and concealed shelters built of branches and earth were all part of this hidden network. During times of war or raids, the young and the vulnerable were guided there swiftly, leaving behind decoys, abandoned fires, or false trails leading enemies astray. The land itself became an ally, swallowing the tribe's most precious members from sight. Rituals, too, played a role in protection. Some tribes called upon the spirits through chants and offerings, seeking blessings over their children. The belief in spiritual guardians gave courage to the people, for they felt the land itself rose up to defend them. A river might be more than water. It could be a blessed barrier to confuse pursuers. A mountain might be more than stone. It could be a shield where echoes warned of intruders. To the native peoples, defense was never just physical, it was spiritual, woven into the fabric of their lives. Protecting the young meant trusting not only in weapons and warriors, but in the sacred ground beneath their feet, the spirits above, and the ancestors who whispered guidance through the wind. There were times when defense meant more than hiding, training, or vigilance. There were times when blood was the only answer. When raiders struck and carried off children, the tribe's grief burned into fury, and warriors rose to bring them back or to avenge what had been stolen. Raiding parties were swift, decisive, and ruthless when the lives of the young hung in the balance. Warriors painted their faces with the marks of vengeance, calling upon ancestors to guide their blades. Every step of the pursuit was driven not only by duty, but by a deep and unshakable bond of kinship. A child taken was not just one family's loss, it was the wound of the entire people. The stories of these rescues passed down like fire across generations. Tales of fathers and uncles storming enemy camps under the cover of night, reclaiming their children from tied posts. Stories of mothers who disguised themselves as mourners, slipping behind enemy lines to bring back their little ones. And though not every raid ended in triumph, The attempt itself became a declaration. No child would be abandoned, no wound accepted without resistance. For the tribes, this cycle of defense and vengeance was not cruelty but necessity. A world that threatened their children demanded strength, and through that strength, the young learned that their lives were worth fighting for, even if it meant blood for blood. In the end, the story of how Native Americans defended their young was not written in single battles or strategies. It was written in the relentless unity of their people. From the first cry of an infant to the last steps of an elder, every member of the tribe understood that the young were sacred. When the world pressed hardest, when storms of war or famine threatened to break them, the people closed ranks. Children were sheltered at the center. Warriors ringed them like iron. And the spirit of the land itself seemed to rise in defense. Even in the darkest hours, when settlers brought rifles, when disease swept like wildfire, when entire nations were forced from their lands, the instinct to shield the young never faltered. They became the heartbeat of resistance. In every song, in every prayer, in every story whispered by firelight, the young were placed at the center. To defend them was not just survival, it was identity, culture, and hope itself. And so, the tribes endured. For every enemy who thought the children would be the easiest to claim, the people showed them otherwise. Defense was not merely protection, it was a vow. A vow that even when the world turned against them, the young would carry the fire forward. The Native Americans defended their young with a unity so fierce, it became legend. Through vigilance, training, spiritual trust, and even vengeance, they carved a shield against a hostile world. And though centuries have passed, their legacy of protection still whispers in the land. What do you think was their greatest defense, the warriors at the edge or the spirit at the center? Share your thoughts. And if you want more untold stories like this, subscribe and join us on the journey.